it's Jan Beta, and today we're going to look at this Technics SL-D20 turntable from the 80s that suffered some shipping damage, unfortunately. So the SL-D20 direct drive automatic turntable system, actually only a semi-automatic, that means it turns off when it reaches the end of the record and places the tone arm back in its holder when the record is finished playing. It's a direct drive Technics, which makes this quite a good turntable by today's standards. I'm quite a bit of a fanboy of these 80s Technics turntables. All the models I've seen are super well built. They are like not high-end models, but they are consumer grade stuff from the 80s where vinyl records were actually a thing. And as you probably know, vinyl records and turntables are seeing a huge renaissance in recent years. So there's a lot of new models available, new model turntables are available. Most of them don't live up to the standards unless you pay really huge sums of money, which I am not ready to do. So I would always recommend, if you are a bit technically inclined, I would always recommend looking for a decent turntable from back in the day, actually, because usually the lower end models are much better built than the lower end models that you can buy today. And unless you buy a very high end model, you're not going to get the quality you get from 80s like lower end models. This is kind of a mid-tier model, I guess. It has a direct drive, it's semi-automatic, and it has adjustable pitch, it has 2 speeds, it has a stop button. So this is a very down-to-earth, super usable, very easy to set up, as we're going to see, turntable from the 80s. A consumer model, one of the better ones that Technics had back in the day. Certainly not one of their higher end models, which are like the 1210 or the 13 or the 14 models that are still sought after, and some of them are still available today or newly available again after all those years. They were basically the same since the 70s, if you can believe it. Usually Technics turntables from this vintage go at 100 euros or even more on eBay these days, no matter what the model is. You want to look for a direct drive model because they are basically indestructible. The direct drive mechanisms, motors that Technics built are super high quality, super reliable usually. So there's nothing much that can go wrong with that. I bought this for 50 euros. It was listed as an untested device, but the tonearm moved and the platter spun, things like that were tested. So chances are this is just going to be a working turntable. Unfortunately though, because this was from a private seller, probably from some relative that got rid of this or some basement storage or something like that, the person who shipped this was definitely not aware about the peculiarities that you have to keep in mind when shipping turntables. And as you've probably spotted already, the case, plastic case, broke. So here's the part that broke off. Thankfully, the pieces that broke off were still in the box that this shipped in, without any padding, basically. It's not recommended to ship something that is quite heavy. This weighs a couple of kilograms in an unpadded box. There was a little bit of padding on the side to make up for the size difference. A piece of the cover here also broke off, so it's no longer hinged. We have to remove this, but other than that, it looks pretty good, actually. It came with the original power cord, I think. It also came, which is quite nice, with the original Bedienungsanleitung, which is the user's manual in German. Quite a nice fold-out thing that doesn't have too much info in it, but it's still nice to have. It also came with this slip mat, R&S Records Order to Dance, which is of very low quality. So I'm probably going to get rid of this altogether. And I'm going to try to fix everything that's broken with this and service it. And also give it a good clean because it's dirty. Just let me tell you about how to properly ship a turntable. Basically, you remove all the moving parts that you can and pad them separately. Use a large enough box, possibly a box in a box, lots of padding around this rather heavy object. Because if the box gets dropped during shipping, it's going to be the end of these usually. And when I got it, the Tonearm, which has a little lock here, was floating on this platter here, which is not good because the needle probably broke in the process. This also, I already half-heartedly patched this up. This is ripped, but it's going to do probably for a while. Probably good idea to get a replacement for that. You can remove these platters in all turntables basically that are of some kind of quality. I've not seen one that this wasn't removable. So you want to pull this out straight up. And you can see on this one, this has the motor windings here and the stator on the platter actually. So basically these direct drive ones have a motor that doesn't touch anything. So it's all electromagnetically moved here. So we have magnets in here, in the platter, which is quite heavy cast aluminum. And we have the windings here. Both of them together are the motor basically. And then we have this shaft, which feels quite locked. So we have to do a good bit of cleaning. As you can see, there's quite some dust in here, but we're going to get rid of that shortly. So you want to remove this when you ship this and wrap it separately. You want to lock the Tonearm. You want to maybe place a bit of painter's tape around these locking mechanisms, which usually these have, but they are not going to survive shipping. Fortunately, the Tonearm itself seems to be straight still, and everything seems to be hunky-dory with that. The needle and possibly the pickup are probably gone because of the messy shipping. Yeah. There's this adapter for 45 singles with the larger cutout that these ship with. This is definitely not the original puck that this came with. It says dual or dual. I don't know how the English-speaking world pronounces that. It's a German brand, so dual. One of the nicest things about these Technics players of that era, the lower end models at least, they all have these T4P pickup systems that you don't have to do any setting up basically. You just you replace the needle by just putting the needle on here. This one's bent, I can already see that. The pickup system itself is just put in this holder with one single screw, and basically if you put a T4P system in here, any kind of T4P system, everything, the whole symmetry and the weight and things like that are set up correctly in these record players. So this is a plug and play kind of system, and you can get quite good systems for this form factor, as we're also going to see. Let me take a couple of seconds to thank the sponsor for this video, PCBWay, my favorite manufacturer of prototype circuit boards of all kinds. They also offer CNC machining, 3D printing, you name it. They basically produce everything that a tinkerer needs for replacement parts and new parts. The quality of all these services is excellent. They are friendly people to work with. I highly recommend checking out the link in the video description. Now back to our record player. I think the first thing I want to do is to see if this spins up at all, which it should, because the seller advertised it as working basically, so let's see. So I plugged this into the mains with the power cord that was supplied, setting the Tonearm to lift. It's lifting very slowly, so I think the lubricant in there is gunked up. And it also seems a bit high. But if I move this, this should start spinning. Yeah, and it stops because the stop mechanism was engaged. But it turns It doesn't seem too bad actually, so that's pretty nice. It seems to work so far. So you can probably see these little dots here. These are actually indicating the correct speed. There's an LED, presumably, in here that flickers at 50 Hertz in my case, because we're in Germany and the mains frequency is 50 Hertz. There's also different rings for, there's one for 33 RPM and one for 45 RPM. And then there's two pairs of those for 50 Hertz mains frequency and 60 Hertz mains frequency. We're going to be concerned with the upper two ones, and the second row is actually for 33, which this is set to, and we can now adjust the speed, and you can see that these start moving, and you want to adjust the speed so that they actually don't move visibly, and then you are at exactly 33 RPM. This fluctuates a bit because probably it needs a good amount of lubrication, but you can probably see that it's pretty accurate already just by turning this pitch adjust wheel here slightly. Let's see if the 45 also works. It takes a while to spin up, but yeah, it's pretty much spot on as well on the uppermost row there. Needs some adjustment, but it basically works. Let's see if our automatic stop works. We should see this stop when I... Yep, it definitely does. When it reaches the inner region of the record where usually the record is ending. Basic functionality is here, which is very promising. I'm going to give this a quick clean, I guess. It's the first step, and remove some of the dust with my vacuum cleaner and a brush from the top part. And then we're going to take a look inside, I guess. So I am using one of these PC cleaning kits, which are super handy for this kind of job. Basically, it hooks up to your regular vacuum cleaner and you get this hose and a little brush that has a vacuum in the center. So we can brush and remove the dust with one pass. Okay, that should have taken care of the surface dust. Now, what I want to do is to take a look at the inside. We're going to do more cleaning on this with a wet sponge or something. It still seems pretty crusty, but the dust is gone and the hair and things like that. And I'm going to put the cover back on. I removed the platter, obviously, and now we should be able to turn this around with the dust cover actually protecting all the mechanical parts on the top side. So this is going to sit on this dust cover. And it is super scratched, so I'm not going to bother putting something soft under there. It is intact though, except for the hinge parts, which usually break off on these. There are several replacement options for these, one of which I have ordered already. So we're going to take a look at that shortly. Let's turn this around carefully. And yeah, sit it nicely. And here's a serial number sticker, SL-D20K, B, I presume, G. Serial number GA3228B009. Yeah, this whole thing is just a plastic cover that we can remove after removing these nicely red colored screws. Also, obviously, the back panel here with the RCA connectors. This is a ground connector, which is a proprietary thing. So I'm probably going to end up either running a wire directly out of the case or putting another connector in there. The cables for these are still available, and I think you can get away with using like a 3mm banana plug. The original plug is something very similar to a banana plug, I think, just a metal rod kind of thing with a wire, just to connect the ground from your amplifier or receiver to this. Obviously made in Japan, because Technics is a Panasonic brand, in case you didn't know. Their hi-fi brand that they discontinued sometime in the 90s, I believe, or early 2000s. And now Technics is back, basically. They are making record players again, as I said. Basically the same as they did in the 70s, with some upgraded models, which are quite interesting, but also super expensive. Okay, this lifts out completely, and there's all that's to it. Yeah, as you can see, there's not much to a record player at all. You want something that turns the platter evenly at the correct speed, which I think this chip here is basically responsible for. The rest of this is power supply for the motor, which we've looked at from the top, and there's a bit of mechanical stuff for the Tonearm lift and things like that. And then basically the Tonearm pickup is directly connected to the outputs. And we have a ground screw that goes to this larger metal part here. Not much else to this. There's some small potentiometers here to set up the speed independently of this wheel, which we're probably going to have to do at some point. And this is the whole controller board, basically, connected to the motor assembly through this ribbon here. Yeah, these are the little potentiometers you can set up. They're even labeled, I think 33 and 45, yes. That's basically all there's to it. Some filtering for the power supply, which has a little rectifier because it's a DC motor. And then there's this chip, which is the logic that keeps the speed. And especially in this region here, you can see the brown spots, which is the old lubricant that we are going to have to remove and replace with new grease. I'm usually using silicone grease on these plastic parts because it doesn't attack the plastic. I think probably that's what they used originally. And of course some dust bunnies have also gathered in the old lubricant. So this is the mechanism where the case broke off. This is the stop button that actuates this rod here, which then goes into the mechanical part there and stops the record from spinning. So I think what I want to do is to try and glue this back in. We have the parts, and possibly I'm going to glue something on there from the backside. We should have enough room for that because the switch here clears this, so we can glue a plastic or probably aluminum or something like that part behind that with some epoxy. I'm going to clean this up with the vacuum cleaner, and then we'll see if we can glue that plastic part back in there, or the two parts actually. So here's my two parts. I think this one goes in here like so, and this one goes in here like so. Yeah, I'm using some plastic glue, I think, here. This is Plast Spezial. This is a German brand model making glue that I'm using here. Used that on a variety of plastic parts already, and it usually works pretty well for quite a few different plastics. Let's see if it works on this. It's already a bit gummed up. Yeah, but this seems to work quite well. Already sticks quite a bit. That's good. And the good thing is that this basically presses itself into position. That's pretty handy. I want to let this dry and then reinforce it. with something that I glue on the backside there. You can still see the cracks, but yeah, better than a completely missing part there. So here's what it looks like. You can see the cracks, and this fits perfectly, obviously. There's no parts missing, thankfully, so we don't have to reconstruct this totally. I ended up clamping an aluminum plate with 2 of these clamps here to this to keep it straight while it settles. I also found a date code looking thing, at least for the mold, the plastic mold. We have these arrows pointing at numbers here, molded into the plastic. And this is a 2, there are 12. So this is probably the month. So that's February, probably. Then we have a 3, which is probably the least significant digit of the day. And this is 1, 2, 3. So that's probably the days times 10. So it's the 13th, February 13th. This points to somewhere between the 8 and the 9. I suppose it's the 8. Probably the year, 82? 82? So yeah, I guess that would make sense. 82, 13th February of 1982 was probably when this mold was made. And I think I want to start the relubrication process while the glue is still settled, because I'm impatient. I hope this doesn't backfire. I'm using a bunch of Q-tips, some alcohol to remove the old lubricant, basically anything that's brown in here, which is super gummed up, so it's super, it's stiffened over the years, definitely. We want to get rid of that completely and then replace it with some fresh silicone grease. So this takes a lot of patience, usually, but it's a good idea to remove as much of the old lubricant as you can. Then we put the new lubricant in all the spots where there was brown gunk. I'm not going to show you the whole process here, just to give you an idea of how stiffened this lubricant is. Let me just remove this here. Definitely a good idea to replace that. And somebody at the factory didn't pay attention and put some on here, where it doesn't belong. Yeah, I'm just going to clean everything off camera, I guess, and then relubricate it. Okay, I think I cleaned up most of the gunk. So I'm now going to use this silicone grease, which is standard stuff, available everywhere, basically. I think this came from Amazon in my case, and I'm using this all the time for these kinds of jobs. So I'm just going to put this everywhere it was, basically. Only small amounts. So I think I lubricated pretty much all the moving parts now, at least all the ones that were lubricated. Took great care to lubricate the whole mechanism here, basically. So this should now be pretty smooth operation. I think my glue should be settled at this point, so we can remove this. Yeah, and it's very straight. So I settled for this strip of plastic that I cut out. That should give us plenty of rigidity for this purpose. I'm probably going to cut it a bit shorter, but this should fit in here. And our switch should still move. Obviously we could remove the whole switch, but I'm not going to bother. Yeah, no, my epoxy is gone, I think. No, that's completely dried. So I'm using the next best thing, which is this magic glue that I'm just going to apply to this. Smear it out and apply. And I'm going to clamp it down quickly. because this is going to cure in seconds. Yep. That feels pretty sturdy to me. Nice. Yeah, this is my solution to that problem, I guess, at least for now. So glued this strip of plastic over the whole length of the crack and a bit extra, which should hopefully make this stable for the foreseeable future, for the next couple of decades, hopefully. Yeah, I guess my next step should be really thoroughly cleaning the bottom part. And I think what I want to do is to just put this into some soapy water and wash it actually, and then let it dry. And the same for the dust cover probably. So for my next trick, I'm going to show you how this is wired up actually. These are the RCA outputs and the little ground lug, or the ground jack. This is just some shielding. And yeah, as I said, this ground connector is a proprietary plug. It's just, I think, a 2mm or 3mm rod, basically the plug that connects to a ground spot on this metal frame here. We are going to, I think I want to drill another hole, I guess, somewhere like here, for another ground connector. I think that would be the most reasonable way to approach this. Yeah, this cutout goes through the whole length, so we can probably put another ground connection here. So I'm just going to drill a hole and put, I think I want to put a phono jack there or something. Just like a standard connector you can easily make a ground cable for. Not this proprietary one, which you would need to buy an expensive one for. And we're not going to change any of the original circuitry. The original ground connector would still work. I think that's the plan. And it should line up with the others roughly, so probably somewhere like here. So I'm just using my awl here to puncture this a bit to have a good place to start the drill. And I'm going to put one of these in here, which is technically a stereo phono jack, but I'm just going to wire all the connections together. So it's just a single connection, basically acting as a ground connector. And then we can just use any 3.5mm phono plug to connect a ground wire to this. And this is a 6mm connector, so we need a 6mm hole. There we go. Yeah, I'm just going to use a short black wire from my parts bin, crimp on a little ring connector, so it is basically going to be the same as the other part here, and I'm just going to screw it to the same terminal on this metal chassis. It doesn't really matter where you put that, it just has to make contact with that, so it's grounded. And obviously I'm going to solder the other end to all the connectors on here, because we only need one connection basically, and this is a stereo socket. Of course you could easily fit like a screw post in here or something like that, something more standard for a ground connection, or a banana socket, banana plug socket, something like that. But I'm going with this because I think it's going to look super elegant, and it's going to work fine for my use case because I have plenty of little 3.5mm plugs to make a ground cable. And then there's going to be some actual soldering. Yeah, that's looking quite decent. Yeah, that's obviously not the purpose for these normally. And just double checking if this is enough wire. Yes, I'm going to put this in here. And there we go, new ground connector, which doesn't look all that bad. And I'm going to connect the ring connector to the ground where the old ground was connected, or is connected. It's still going to be connected. Yeah, there we go. Let's see if we have ground everywhere. Yes, everywhere. And the audio ground is actually separate on these. Separate grounds for both channels even. But we should have a connection between here and here. Yes. And inside everything should be connected to ground on our new socket, which it is. Nice. We're going to put this back on and it should still fit. That's pretty nice. And that pretty much concludes what I want to do to the mechanical parts and the electronics on the flip side of the record player. I don't have the capacitors in stock. Otherwise, I would probably replace the electrolytic capacitors on this little board here. And another thing you could do is to replace the thermal compound on this transistor here as well as on the main IC on this board. But as I said, I don't have the capacitor values necessary in stock at the moment, so I'm going to revisit this. You have to remove the screws that hold down this heatsink on the IC from the flip side of this PCB. So yeah, I'm basically going to do that when I have the capacitor values ordered. Replace all the electrolytic capacitors, which is not strictly necessary because they are still good, and this is just basically a motor driver board. There's nothing audio-wise going through this, so we're going to be fine. I am going to spray some contact cleaner into these little potentiometers here, and I'm also going to clean the output RCA jacks here thoroughly with some contact cleaner. And then I'm going to close the bottom side. So this is a very non-corrosive contact cleaner that can be used without any issues on potentiometers and such. And I'm going to slightly move these back and forth so the contact cleaner can do its magic. But I'm going to make sure that they are sitting in approximately the spot they were in. I'm also going to spray some contact cleaner into this potentiometer for the speed adjustment and move it. And I'm basically going to do the same with these RCA jacks. Just spray some contact cleaner in there carefully and put some plugs in and kind of move them so the contacts get a bit cleaner. And as I said, it would be a good idea to replace the electrolytic capacitors as well as the thermal compound. I'm not going to do this on camera as I explained because I don't have the capacitors. Should be pretty easy to do if you know your way around a soldering iron. I'm just going to put this lid back on and put all the screws back in. It is a bit scratched and things like that, but it is way, way cleaner than it was. This was filthy. And you want to turn these screws to the left until they sink into the threads that are already cut, so you don't risk damaging the plastic. And you also don't want to put too much pressure on these and don't tighten them too much because the plastic is going to be a bit brittle after all these years at this point, so we don't want to risk damaging it. So now we can flip this over again and work on the top side, which also finally gives me the opportunity to give this a bath in some soapy water and clean it because it is super filthy. I think it's not that scratched really, it is just filthy. And basically the same is true for all the surfaces here. So I'm going to use some window cleaner and a microfiber cloth and try to get as much grime off the surface of this record player as possible. And I'm going to try to not get anything into the electronics. So let's see where we get with this. It is dirty as heck. I'm not going to bore you with this whole process. Just let me see what I can do here. It is, as you can see, there's quite some dirt coming off there. Ugh. And I'm using isopropyl alcohol and a toothbrush on these buttons and sliders, which apparently works wonders. I'm also using alcohol to clean up the whole surface. Like the final pass is going to be with alcohol. But yeah, this works really well actually. Yeah, I think that's about as clean as I can get this in a reasonable way. I used Q-tips, a toothbrush, a microfiber cloth, window cleaner, alcohol, and I still wasn't able to get this stain off the stop button here. I'm not sure what that is, but it didn't come off. I don't know how to get that off. Maybe some more work, some more hours with a toothbrush or something like that. But other than that, it looks way, way better than before. It even looks a bit shiny again. There are some nicks and scratches from age and use, but otherwise it does look kind of acceptable again, which is nice. I'm also going to clean the platter with some alcohol. And yeah, this gets a quick wipe with alcohol too. And we're going to put a bit of lubrication in the shaft. You, of course, want to be careful around these Hall effect sensors, which I believe they are. So I'm just going to give this a careful wipe. And as you can see, there's quite some dirt on there. Maybe this was a chain smoker's machine. I'm not sure. This is just as dirty. And as for the shaft, we want to put a little drop of oil into this. You can probably see the ring there in the center. That's the actual part where it moves. So we're going to put a bit of sewing machine oil into that very spot there. Just one little drop, move it a bit to work it in. So that should be lubricated. Let's see if it still spins. Okay, it spins better than before. Okay, I'm going to put the rubber mat back on that I'm also going to have to clean. I'm going to use some dish soap on this. This is just a rubber or silicone mat, so nothing much can go wrong there. By the way, as you've probably noticed, I removed the needle to not unnecessarily endanger that. Yeah, so it apparently still works. Stop. Also still works. I'm letting the dust cover soak in some soapy water in the bathroom. And while we're at it, we can set the lift height of the Tonearm with a sacrificial record, basically. This is a very scratched old Pity Plutch. The Eastern German viewers are going to recognize this. We are going to set the height of the needle. And for that purpose, I'm just going to unplug this again. There's a screw here on this Tonearm lift that we can set, and we need to set this up to between 5 and 8 millimeters between the needle, tip of the needle and the record actually. So let's try and do that. So here's the screw. We are going to turn, if I turn it right, it's going to lower the height, and left is going to slightly raise the Tonearm lift. And we're aiming for between 5 and 8 millimeters. So probably something like 6.5 millimeters is the ideal thing to aim for. This is way too high. This is 6.5 millimeters here. That's more like it. It's probably quite accurate. You don't have to be super precise with this measurement. It's just the lift of the Tonearm. So it doesn't take forever to set down on the record. And it's still a bit slow. There's actually a cylinder in the Tonearm mechanism with some silicone grease of a certain viscosity that regulates the speed of that, basically. So yeah, but it's totally acceptable at this point. I think this is the lift, and this is setting the needle down. Okay, all good. And while we have this record on here, which is sacrificial. Let's see if we actually get something with this broken, very likely broken needle, which was completely dislocated. Yeah, I can actually hear sound, so that's good. As I said, the tone arm should be factory set to the precise weight that this needs, and the anti-skating should also be set up. You can still adjust it manually if you so desire, but you usually don't have to. Pretty satisfied so far, that's good. So I also determined now that the auto stop is in the correct spot. So it should now lift the arm and return the arm to the 0 position, to the holder here, and stop the record. Yep, and it does. And it's in the correct spot. If that spot is misaligned, you can realign that with a little screw that's under a rubber cap on the tone arm assembly here. So this little rubber cap, you lift that with something that's preferably not a screwdriver to not scratch the case. And then there's this Phillips screw under there that you can turn to set the point of the auto stop mechanism. That's correctly aligned on this one, so I won't fiddle with that. What I did adjust though is the speed. There is 2 little potentiometers on the circuit board to set the speed for 33 and 45 rounds per minute. And you want to set that up in a way so that if you switch between the 2, they are aligned correctly. And as you can see, I pretty much nailed that. The upper ring here, the stroboscope, is the 45, and that's pretty much, it's not quite 100% accurate, but if you switch the speed to 33, the 33 is the second from the top here, and that takes a while to settle, but then it is very accurately set. And you can actually access the screws to set these through these holes here and the hole in the platter here. So you want to turn this on repeatedly and slightly adjust these. One is for 45 and the other one is for 33 rounds per minute setting. You want to set these up so that your pitch adjust is the same for both, and both are accurate if you have this set up accurately for one of the speeds. I also gave the dust cover a very good scrubbing and soak in soapy water. Unfortunately, as you can probably even see on camera, there's quite a few spots where this is severely scratched, so we're going to have to do some polish on that later, I guess. You can probably see that there's some severe scratches. It looks like tire marks from a toy car or something like that, really. This is pretty much clean now, so all that's left to do is to remove the hinges in the back because they are broken off, and to polish this a bit to get rid of these scratch marks that are super severe. So let's do some work on the cover. So these dust covers usually have these things on the back, plastic tabs that slide into slots in the actual hinges that are on the main unit. And as you can see, this piece here, I think it was still attached before this got shipped, but with that kind of packaging, it naturally broke off. And this is a very common thing to happen to these things, just snap off. But there is a fix for that that's pretty elegant, I think. There are actually replacements. You basically screw these, you drill some holes, you remove the remnants of this completely, file it flat, and there's a plate that goes into the inside, and this hinge thing goes on the outside, and this is made from steel, so these should be pretty sturdy if the case plastic holds that. But yeah, these have threaded inserts, so you have some little screws that go in there from the inside through this mounting plate, and you have to position these correctly, of course. There's also 3D printed replacement things that look quite the same, but I found these steel ones. I'm going to link the shop I bought these from in the video description. I think the steel variant is a bit more elegant and a bit more suitable for a nice record player like this. And they're not that much more expensive than the 3D printed ones. So obviously the first thing we have to do is to remove these tabs completely and file these down so we have a flat surface to drill some holes for these in. And I think I'm going to go with a Dremel and a couple of files. And I'm going to protect the surroundings here with some masking tape before I do that, while we remove these. You don't want to run the Dremel too quickly, because otherwise you're going to risk melting the plastic. Okay, that one is extracted. On to the next one. Now I'm going to file these down with some manual files, I guess. Yeah, I am going to report back when I have these filed down. So after some meticulous filing, I have this one pretty much down. There's still a little ridge, but you can see we are starting to eat into our masking tape here. And that's probably a good point to stop. I ended up using my pocket knife here. The file on that is super well suited for plastics. And then I used a regular smaller file and the nail file. Okay, I think I got both of these down to a reasonable height. They're not quite completely flush. You can still feel the ridges here, but it should be enough. This acrylic is bend a bit inwards anyway, so probably we're going to be able to fit the screws there and not put too much stress on the plastic. Now to position this correctly and determine the position where the holes are going to go, we're going to have to dust this off and place it back on the turntable actually. These have a bit of play, so that's going to be helpful. And I'm going to drill some smaller pilot holes with a 3mm drill. And then I think I'm going to go with 5. The screws are probably around 3mm. So we're going to have plenty of room to adjust. So these have some rounded edges that are slightly more rounded than the other side, and those match up with the rounded edges on these. That's the inside, so the top side of the lid. And yeah, we should be able to place these. Ah, beautiful. Yeah. This looks half decent. As you can see, it doesn't look half bad with these replacements. And they are sturdy in there. So there's enough force spread over the plastic, so these won't break off anytime soon. So now the obvious question is, are these going to behave with the record player? Okay, that works. Yeah, I think I pretty much nailed it. Yeah, that's super straight actually. Nice. Except for the fact that the plastic is slightly warped. But looking at this line here And also the lines on the sides. This is very straight. And now you can see the hinge mechanism. The hinge mechanism actually allows me to prop this up like this. So I'm going to tighten the screws in this position, I guess. And it totally looks like something that was originally on here. So can recommend these replacements wholeheartedly. Nice. I'm probably going to leave the polishing job maybe for another video, or maybe I'm going to do it off camera altogether. But yeah, this works beautifully. Now I think the last thing to do is to make some cables to connect this to something and replace the old system in there, which is probably very much done with. And as a replacement for the original Technics P24 system that's in here, I have this nice Shure M92E, which is actually pretty sought after these days. I think they are not produced anymore. But this is a T4P P-mount system that I used to use on my P-mount record player, which was a similar model to this, like a direct drive, lower end Technics. And this was really, it served me well all those years. I'm going to put that in there. It's definitely a bit of a better system than the one that's originally mounted here. And replacing one of these P-mount or T4P systems is literally just a matter of locking the arm in place, removing this little set screw, wow, which is a bit stuck. And we should be able, this goes through, we should be able to just pull this out carefully. There we go. And these have these plugs on the back. And the same goes for this one, which just should fit in here fine, I hope. There we go. That's plugged in. And we put the screw back in, turning it slightly left till it clicks into the threads, and then just screwing it back down. And that's how you replace these systems. I'm going to have to remove some of these plastic chips that are still everywhere. But now we have the Shure M92E on here. And it should be all set up. These P-mount systems are all correctly set up for having the correct weight. And also the position of the stylus should be exactly right. You don't have to do any more setting up on these. Now the only thing left to do for this video, at least, I'm going to do some more polishing on the dust cover, definitely, and some more cleaning probably. But we need to make some cables to hook this up to something and see if it actually produces sound output. So for the audio cable, I'm going with this, does it say somewhere? Sommer cable, Onyx. It's a German brand that produces excellent cables, and this is an instrument cable as well as a hi-fi cable. No audiophile bull involved in these. I love these cables. Pretty easy to work with, pretty easy to solder. I got some Hicon connectors. These are RCA connectors of super high quality, not too expensive. Hicon CM03. I got some red ones and some white ones, obviously, for the stereo pair. I'm not going to go the full audiophile route for this one. This is going to be plenty good enough for the purpose. I like to put a bit of electrical tape around the hot pin, so the signal pin that's not shielded, just to make sure that that is not shorting out against the ground. So I made the audio cable. Let's check if it actually doesn't short out anywhere. So you want to check between the center pin and the sleeve. And we want to check between center pins and sleeve on both sides here, just in case something went wrong. So this should be an excellent audio cable now. Seems to have all the connections and no unnecessary connections. And we also need a ground wire. I'm just using this black wire here, which is pretty thin wire, but it's going to be sufficient, I think. Roughly the same length as for the other cable. And I'm going to put a 3.5 millimeter plug on one end, like this, and on the other end I'm going to crimp a spade connector or a fork connector so it can screw into the screw post on the amplifier. And we don't have to be very careful to not short out, because all the connections on this plug, or both the connections on this is a mono 3.5 millimeter phono plug, all the connections are going to go to the same ground anyway. This is going to work fine. That should do. And the other end is just going to be crimped. Possibly also soldered additionally, because I don't think the wire is thick enough. We're going to see. I'm just going to add a bit of solder additionally, because this is pretty marginal, as I said. I used a bit of flux to make it easier to solder on this rather large piece of metal. Yeah, that's now properly connected. This is our ground strap. Okay, I have connected this up with my cables I just made to my beautiful Marantz 2252B, which I did some restoration work on in a previous video, and it actually works beautifully. The stylus is a bit worn out, so it's probably a good idea to replace that in the longer run. But other than that, this works beautifully now. And the Tonearm lift is a bit slow, but that's better than actually too fast, because yeah, the needle drops at that speed. And yeah, it is a fully working turntable again, and it actually doesn't sound bad at all, apart from the cover still being super scratched. I have to polish that, but I'm probably not going to make a separate video about that. That's going to take some patience. But other than that, this is fully functional and it doesn't look half bad, sounds good. I call this a success. Yeah, so that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this little excursion into the world of record player restorations. I managed to make this one pretty much a very usable record player again, and I'm pretty satisfied with the results. As I said, I'm going to do some polishing on the dust cover, because that doesn't look very nice, as you've seen. Other than that, it's pretty much back to its original performance. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope to see you again on this channel for some other hi-fi stuff, or maybe the retro computer stuff I usually do on here. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon and on Ko-fi and on the YouTube channel memberships page and elsewhere. I'm Jan Beta. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.